Welcome to Chop Shop Motors. My name is Clay, and we're here for another segment. I think this one's going to be kind of a catch-up on what we've done over the last week. So, on the F100 build, we're making progress. As you can see, things are moving along. I will say it was a lofty goal, and it's hard to keep the chores and the need to do's at bay long enough to pull something like this off. And so it's always a juggling act to make that happen. But the little F100's coming along, and I'll show you some of the work that has kind of happened over the last week. So, ordered brake hose for the rear. I had bought a brake hose that would have worked for an F100. The interesting thing is this has posed a couple little hurdles to solve, and I'm happy to kind of tell you what I did. But the blending of F100 and F250 parts creates some issues when it comes to brake lines and things of that nature, and so had to get a little creative. The other piece was that some of the parts for the F100 version I didn't have. So there is a block, a brass block that bolts to the rear end that the vent bolt screws through and holds it to the rear end, and then the brake lines screw to it and the Flexo screws to it. And on the parts truck I bought, the F100, it had been robbed off by the previous owner, and so I didn't have that. And so when I went up to the other shop, I grabbed one off of a 9-inch and thinking it would be the same, or hoping it would be the same, and it had 7/16 threads instead of 3/8 threads. So it was probably off of, I don't know, a full-size, something with a little bit bigger brake line than the F100 would have used. So lo and behold, I mean, bottom line is some of the, I didn't have all the parts I needed. So the new Flexos is on the front, and the wheel cylinders on the front are F100. The brake lines and the fitting on the back of the master cylinder is F250. So what it does is it requires 3 adapters to go from 7/16 24 down to 3, I think it's 7/16 24. Anyway, 7/16 fine, which is the thread on the flared fitting, and convert that down, reduce that down to the 3/8 24, which is what the Flexos was. So I found a place that sold those at a reasonable price. It's easy to find a place that sells them at an exorbitant price. So I found a place that sold them for, I don't know, I think they were about $5 a piece to get to me. So I ordered 3 of those. I need 1 for each of the front corners and 1 for the rear hose. So with those 3 adapters, I'll be able to blend and combine the 2 different hose sizes that I have going on. It's a pretty common issue. I just didn't stock any of those fittings. There's also a fitting that exists that will take that small line and move it up to a 7/16 National Fine threaded fitting. So there are a couple different ways to make that happen if you're planning it out and building it from scratch, but when you're blending existing parts together, it's a little bit different. So then I looked for a brake hose that would work, because the brake hoses I had were standalone and required that brass block that bolted to the rear end. And the brass block I wasn't actually able to find. I'm sure I could find one over time and then put it in the parts pile, but I didn't have one, and I haven't really kept my eye open for one, and the one off of the F250 would have used the 7/16 lines. So I found a brake hose off of a 1970 Ford van that had the 3/8 National Fine flared fittings for the two hard lines, and had a flex hose integral, and it was 3/8 National Fine female on the other end. So that's gonna work. So I bought that. It's here. I put that on this week. The other three fittings are coming. So I'll kind of walk you through, or show you anyway, how those play in. Pretty straightforward. It isn't the installation that's tricky, it's the finding what you need and figuring out who has it and things of that nature. So that's the hard part. So brake lines I worked on. As you could see, you should have seen the last video where we put the hood on, and you know, it fit really horrible. I played a little bit with that. I also ordered a ignition switch for this truck, just because you know, I came across one that looked like it was going to be closer to what it should have had, so I got that piece coming. Other pieces that I put on were in the core support area. The core support wasn't complete, and I actually didn't realize it until I went to mount the radiator, that there was a flanged there's a flange on each side that the radiator actually bolts to, and one of them had been removed off of the core support. So I had two other core supports, so I cut the rivets off of that flanged piece, and I installed it on this core support. So those things all take you know, big chunks of time, kind of an evening apiece. So I'll show you what that looks like, what I did, and kind of, you know, what the progress is so far. So let's take a look at that stuff. So what I'm showing you right here is that fitting that bolts on the rear end housing. Pretty typical for a Ford. You'll see this on lots of different versions of it, and there's nothing too exotic about it. Not all of them use the vent. So this little guy right here is actually a vent for the rear end housing. Not all of them use that vent bolt to hold down that banjo-ish fitting, that multi-fitting there. But a lot of them do. So I used that. That's the one off of Econoline van. It works out well. It seemed to fit pretty close to probably what the original one looked like. And the only thing I have to do is, once I get that adapter fitting, then I'll shorten up that line on the top, that steel line that you see, that is 7/16 on the end. I'll shorten that up so it fits that bracket where we moved it. And this piece will be done back here as far as hard lines. So up here, let's go and get around this rod. So the radiator bolts into the core support, and the core support has, I'll put my finger right here, core support has a flange on the side that sets in there, and then it is riveted to the actual core support, and the radiator bolts to it. So on this core support, which was a really nice core support, and the one I was originally going to use on the nice truck build, it had this flange on the side. When you go to this side, it did not. So sun's kind of bright, I don't want to blind you. So I cut this piece, I cut the 3 rivets off that go down here, off of an existing core support I had, and pulled this bracket off and bolted it in here. So it's bolted in instead of riveted in, but now the radiator is all bolted in, and that's another piece that is complete. I also bolted on the voltage regulator got that piece bolted in place. On the 6-cylinder truck, it would have been on that side, and on this truck, it's on this side. So let me read. Is that accurate? On the V8 truck, it's on this side. On the 6-cylinder truck, it's on this side, like it is here. Sorry, had that backwards. Trying to keep it straight on where the parts came from. So these inner fender wells came off of obviously a V8 truck. So that's why this one looks like it's been painted around, because it probably had a voltage regulator on it when somebody threw some primer on those inner fender wells. So that's the story there. A couple things that we need to do in here. The front end isn't exactly right from an adjustment perspective, so I'm gonna have to I'm gonna swap hoods. That won't be today, but swapping hoods is one thing. Bolting down all of the miscellaneous bolts is another. So I'm going to play with that. I might even do some of that today. I have a little time. So there's bolts along the inner fender well that need to get bolted in. There's bolts along the core support that need some tension, just to get everything in with the right number of attachment hardware. So that will be what I mess with next, and I also will, I think, if I have time, kind of depending on what the day looks like, I will also put some rear wheel cylinders in it so that the brakes are pretty much all done. That is the status. That's how far I've gotten. Definitely not as far as I would have liked to. Everything takes a little longer. I guess I should stop saying that. But that's kind of the story. So I like looking inside. It's looking all complete. So it's probably as much for me as it is for any of you guys. It's just cool. All right. I'm Clay for Chop Shop Motors, and we'll see you on the next project.